holiday you probably haven't heard of, but it still means quite a lot to people like me. This weekend was National Train Day. Yep, the Saturday closest to May 10th, in this case the actual May 10th, is recognized as National Train Day. It was actually started by Amtrak as a means of getting awareness for trains. And even though Amtrak doesn't do anything anymore, it's still become quite popular in railroad towns around the country. And in the spirit of National Train Day, I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about some of the more notable things in American railroading history. We'll talk about National Train Day itself, the event it commemorates. And we'll talk about the nation's first railroad. And then we'll talk about something closer to home here in West Virginia that you really can't tell the story of American railroading without. And then we'll finish up with the most famous train in the world. So come on along with me as we take a look at this very special, a little bit late admittedly, but still cool, National Train Day episode of Train Time. Let's get going. National Train Day honors the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad at Promontory, Utah on May 10, 1869. On that date, the Union Pacific, which had been building west out of Omaha, Nebraska, met the Central Pacific, which had built east out of Sacramento, California. With the driving of the Golden Spike, the railroad was completed, and the telegraph was sent over the wire around the country that read just one word: done. Today, Union Pacific still exists, and every now and then you can see one of Uncle Pete's engines running around east of the Mississippi, like this one leading a Norfolk Southern intermodal train westbound through Canova, West Virginia in June 2023. Uncle Pete is my favorite nickname for Union Pacific, in case you're wondering just where that came from. The Transcontinental Railroad was not the first railroad in this country. That honor belongs to the Baltimore and Ohio. Just how old is the B&O? Well, ground was broken for the B&O on July 4th, 1828. Charles Carroll, their last surviving signer of the Declaration of Independence, laid the cornerstone. This was Carroll's last public act. Not bad for a 91-year-old who had had a major hand in creating this country and forever changing it. He died in 1832 at the age of 95. During the Civil War, the B&O came under attack by both sides, as its lines held great strategic importance. The B&O ended up serving the Union cause, and by the end of the war, became known as Mr. Lincoln's Railroad. The B&O was actually involved in the first bloodshed of the Civil War. On April 19, 1861, the road was transporting troops of the 6th Massachusetts Militia out of Baltimore. As the troops transferred from the President Street station of the Philadelphia, Wilmington, and Baltimore Railroad to the B&O's Camden Street station, they were attacked by a mob of anti-war protesters and Southern sympathizers. Unfortunately, 17 people lost their lives and countless were wounded. This riot inspired a man named James Ryder Randall to pen a poem entitled Maryland, My Maryland. The poem was put to the tune of Oh Christmas Tree and was the state song of Maryland from 1939 to 2021. After the war, the B&O continued to expand westward by acquiring several lines and eventually making its way into Chicago and St. Louis, becoming one of the biggest roads in the East. The B&O was a pioneer in dieselization, ordering an early box cab model from EMC. That's Electromotive Corporation, the independent company that would eventually be bought by General Motors to become the EMD, Electromotive Division, that we all know and love. In 1937, B&O went back to EMC for new passenger power, and what emerged was a sleek, stylish, streamlined number 51, an EA which was promptly put to work on the B&O's finest passenger train, the Capital Limited. Number 51 was the first streamlined diesel ever produced in the U.S. It's this scheme that CSX adapted for the Office Car Special and the Heritage Unit. After many years of struggling financially, the B&O came under the control of the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway in 1963. The two railroads were technically separate as it was not a true merger, but they were operated as one combined road, with paperwork during that time reading C&O B&O. In 1973, C&O B&O, along with the Western Maryland, which B&O had a controlling interest in, became the Chessie system, again with all roads maintaining their respective identities. In 1987, the B&O was merged into the C&O, which itself was merged into CSX that same year. Another event to happen on May 10th was the beginning of CSX's Heritage Program. Word got around in April 2023 that CSX had pulled engine number 3059 into the shops in Waycross, Georgia, and renumbered the engine number 1827. This was in homage to the Baltimore and Ohio's founding date. On May 10th, 2023, the engine was unveiled at the shops in Waycross, and this was the first Heritage unit CSX produced, the first of 21 we would get over the ensuing year and a half or so. About a year later, the engine was in coal service in West Virginia, and we checked out on the R.J. Corman West Virginia line. Of course, the Chessie in the Chessie system is the beloved mascot of the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway. And even though she got her own railroad in 1973 with the Chessie system's formation, her story begins about 40 years before that with a man named L.C. Probert. Listen to this story, and you'll understand why Chessie is in this, because you can't tell the story of American railroading without mentioning Chessie. It's just not possible. L.C. Probert was the C&O's marketing director. He was a man who had already made his mark on history during his time with the Associated Press. It was Probert who broke the news of the Zimmerman telegram directly from Woodrow Wilson himself. Probert also covered World War I quite extensively for the AP, but his name was never seen on any byline. In early 1933, he was trying to come up with a new slogan to advertise C&O's air-conditioned trains. He came across a lithograph of a little kitten fast asleep under a blanket. Probert knew he had the face for his new ads, and I'm willing to bet he had no idea how popular Chessie would become. In September 1933, Chessie first appeared in Fortune magazine, and she was instantly beloved by the public, so much so that C&O got over 300 letters asking for a copy of the ad within just a few days. That December, she made her first appearance on a C&O timetable with the slogan, "Sleep like a kitten and arrive fresh as a daisy." And with that, this tiny little kitten fast asleep under a blanket became the image of the C&O, and indeed the image of railroading for so many people. CSX honored the Chessie system with its very own Heritage Unit, and we're down at Harvey on the R.J. Corman and West Virginia line watching the engine take a loaded coal train to Thurmond. The most famous train in the world is certainly worth looking at in an episode about American railroading. The New York Central gave the 20th Century Limited that label, and to tell you the truth, it may well be. In its day, if you told someone who wasn't really a rail fan that you rode the Century, you probably had their ears perking up wanting to learn more about the trip. The 1938 Century is probably what most people think of when it comes to this train. The 30s was the era of streamlining, and the Century was no exception. The 38th Century debuted a new streamlined design for both engines and cars designed by Henry Dreyfuss, and it really was quite a sight as it whisked passengers between New York and Chicago on a tight 16-hour overnight schedule. The train was timed so that you could leave in the evening and arrive at your destination for business opening the next day. Among the amenities the train had to offer were a barber shop, a drawing room, a secretary, maid service, and of course it was an all-Pullman train. No coach passengers here. This was the train for the elite. The Century was in direct competition with the Pennsylvania Railroad's Broadway Limited, somewhat so that the trains were due to arrive in Chicago at the exact same time, 8 a.m. And while they never officially called it a race, the two lines paralleled each other on the run into Chicago, and each crew took great pride in being the first to reach the Windy City. The New York Central is one of CSX's predecessors, and thus there is a heritage unit that honors the railroad. In March 2024, the engine was in coal service, and we're in Thurmond in the last little bit of daylight. Actually, my phone has gained up to give us a good bit more light, cause it's dark right now, as the engine is mid-train on a loaded coal train going east. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the program and would like to watch past episodes, I invite you to like our Facebook page. You can subscribe to us on YouTube, use our Roku channel, watchnrn.com, and you can check us out on cable here in Fayette County as well. Channel 4 in the Plateau, Channel 17 down in the Valley. So, for the New River Network, I'm Lucas Berry, reminding you anytime is train time.